Awesome. So welcome everyone to the Allies for Refugee Integration webinar. This is really exciting because it's our first webinar in this series. This one is on the topic of strategies to secure affordable housing for sponsored refugees. And this is a topic that is of interest and a topic of great need. And I think it's reflected in the fact that so many of you are here today at a busy time of year to connect and share to find strategies to address this really big need for sponsored refugees and indeed for many newcomers, refugees, and Canadians. We are very glad to have you with us today, and Floren, my colleague, is on the call. I want to thank her for supporting from OCASI. So Floren, feel free to give a little wave. Thank you so much.
Hi everyone, thank you for joining.
And Floren is a lovely bilingual colleague, so if you have anything to say in French, you're welcome to do so. I think I'm just going to mute someone who is unmuted, so please mute yourself. Just a last reminder to mute yourself right now, just in case you have background noise. The agenda for today. So we are going to start off with a panel discussion. We have 4 amazing resource people who are going to be sharing their unique perspectives around their strategies for securing affordable housing. We'll have a chance to ask them questions, and then we have asked you to send in what you want to learn in advance. And so we have gathered all of your questions, and we're going to answer them as best we can in the last section, more practical nitty-gritty questions around housing, and especially subsidized housing in Ontario. And that will be our time. So because there's so many of us, we won't be speaking verbally as participants. So do keep yourself muted, but we're going to be using the chat to gather your questions and ask our lovely resource people. So next slide. A quick introduction to the topic before we launch into our panel. Affordable housing is, as I said, a topic that's of great interest to a lot of people. Immigrants and refugees themselves, for whom housing is a top priority, sponsors who, finding housing is something that can be a really big stress at the beginning, especially of sponsorships, settlement agencies, policymakers, a lot of people care about improving access to affordable housing. And affordable housing means different things to different people. There are many different paths to affordable housing, whether through, we're talking about renting, temporary housing, permanent housing, subsidized housing. So it is a vast topic for us to try to cover today in 90 minutes. It has a lot of different facets, whether we're talking about, policies, whether we're talking about economic and financial concerns. We also, have a lot of questions around the practicalities of it. How do we work with landlords? How do we deal with barriers such as credit checks? So, we will ask your forgiveness for not being able to answer all of these big pressing questions today. But what we hope to do is spark some thoughts, some conversation, to hear about strategies and different perspectives in different places that will hopefully be helpful for you as you seek to support sponsored refugees in your role finding affordable housing. And this is not the end. There are many other webinars and many other people working on this. And so we'll also be able to share some of those resources with you to continue your learning journey on this. On that note, I'm very happy to introduce today's resource people. I'm going to go ahead and introduce all of them at once, and then we're going to ask them one by one to share 5 to 10 minutes, their strategies and perspectives on finding affordable housing. Excuse me, if you could please mute yourself so we can hear one another. Thank you. Our first resource person is Azaria Sputario. Azarius is a housing advisor at New Journey Housing in Winnipeg, and we're very glad to have him here, who has more than 11 years experience in this role, which is awesome. We'll then be introducing, yes, Azarius, please give a wave, and then I'll pass the floor to you after I introduce everyone. Thank you. Our second resource person is Elizabeth Mitchell. Elizabeth is a retired lawyer and a sponsor in Toronto. So hi, Liz. Want to give a little hello. Our third resource person is Usama Al-Sakadi. Usama is a sponsored refugee and a recipient of Habitat for Humanity, and so he'll be speaking about his experience with Habitat. So hi, Usama. And lastly, Maria Ashman. Maria, hello, please mute yourself if you're in the background. We're going to have to automatically mute everyone, I think. Maria Ashman is the manager at Central Housing Register in Windsor, Essex. So feel free to say hi, Maria. Great. Hi. So hello. Thank you, Maria. All right. So without further ado, our first resource person, Azarius. So you can get rid of the slides, Floren, and I'm going to spotlight you, Azarius, and we will hear from you about your strategies. Go ahead.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. My name is Azarius, as you said, and I'm working at New Journey Housing in Winnipeg, Manitoba. New Journey Housing is a resource center for newcomers to Canada. And first of all, we give information to newcomers to Canada. We believe that newcomers who are coming to Canada, they have their own way of renting. But when they come to Canada, everything is different. So they need an organization or somebody who can give them the orientation on how to rent. So we have a rental workshop. In a rental workshop, we teach rights and responsibilities of tenants and landlords. We want our clients to know their rights and responsibilities as tenants and to know the rights and responsibilities of the landlord. So we want them to be good tenants. We teach them how to search for an apartment or a house for rent, and we help them to find an apartment or a house for rent. And we help them to understand some rental documents. For example, the applications, the leases, condition reports, security deposit, and so on and so forth. So we want our clients to be good tenants. And when there is a problem between the tenant and the landlord, we come in. Our clients will call us and say, I have this problem. So we come in, we call the landlord, we talk to the landlord, and if for any reason we cannot solve the problem, so we go to the government, Manitoba government, and they help us to solve the problem. And as New Journey Housing, we also help the newcomers to Canada to apply for subsidies. We have rent assist, whereby the government is helping low-income, permanent residents, newcomers, or naturalized Canadians, newcomers, to pay their rent. There are other subsidies like rent assist, like rent supplement. And we are working with private sponsors. With private sponsors, we normally advise them to work with private small landlords. Because when they talk to small landlords who have maybe few properties, That way they can explain their situation to them, and they can understand. And if, for example, there are straight rules, we can also help them talk to those landlords. Some big companies, they have their rules and regulations, and we cannot change those rules and regulations. But we will advocate for the newcomers who are coming under sponsorship. That is why we work closely with sponsors in Manitoba. So we have different rent assistance. As I said, we have rent assist. We have also rent supplement. We have also subsidized the houses. And we always tell the sponsors, all these subsidies, they will not affect you. They will not affect you when you want to sponsor another person. Some are worried and they say, if we take those subsidies, we will not be able to sponsor other people. So I'm here to tell you that these subsidies will not affect you. And but there are some challenges that sponsors face when they sponsor or when they are looking for apartment or houses for their sponsors. The first one I can mention is to find a bigger apartment, maybe 4-bedroom or 5 bedrooms. These bigger apartments, it's not easy to find them because they are few, and to find them is not easy. And some sponsor refugees are coming, they have a big family. So now we are working with landlords to build more affordable, big apartments. Also, another challenge newcomers face when they come here, they don't understand the rules and regulations. For example, they can give security deposit in so many places. Then it can affect them if they are approved in more than one. They are at risk of losing one security deposit. So we will advise the sponsors to work closely with different organizations so that they can find adequate, affordable housing for the sponsors. I don't know if in Ontario you have organizations which are working with the sponsors, but it will be, I want to suggest that it's a good idea to have such organization working with the sponsors to find affordable housing in Ontario or elsewhere. So I will be happy to answer the questions on coming from you. Otherwise, I can stop here, and I'm really grateful for this opportunity and looking ahead to answer the questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Azarias. That was a great introduction to some of the things that housing advisors like yourself do, and the services that you offer, and the deep experience you have in all of these kinds of kind of tasks and relationship building that you do to find affordable housing for your clients. I'm sure we'll have, I already see one question for you, but we're going to first give it over to Liz to talk, and then we'll gather some of these questions for the end. So if you do have questions that come up for the panelists, feel free to pop that in the chat, and we'll be keeping an eye on that. Great, so Liz, would you like to share a little bit as your perspective as a sponsor?
Certainly. Pardon me, as Michelle said during the introductions, I'm a retired lawyer in downtown Toronto, and I became involved in sponsoring refugees in 2016 in response to that, the Alvin Curdy newspaper photograph that was so gripping. With respect to, I've been the project lead with two different families. One was a dad and mom with 4 children from the ages of 3 to 14. And the second family was single mom. She's the sister of the first mom. And she's a single mother with 4 children who were ages 12 to 21 when she arrived. So one of them arrived in December 2016, and the other arrived in August 2019. So with respect to housing, I think my most important piece of housing strategy is to plan ahead on the housing file, because as Zarius has pointed out, it's very difficult, particularly when you need a bigger place. So our particular groups, in both cases, we divided our group of sponsors into having different responsibilities, and our housing chair had to figure out what they were going to do, and they had to write it down. So every committee that we struck had to write down what their jobs were going to be and who was going to do them and what resources they could find, because we had a lot of lead time before our family got here, but very little lead time between when we found out they were coming and the date they actually arrived. So you really have to be on top of having what you will be doing and how you're going to get there identified well in advance. Pardon me. The family one of the first things, once you've identified your sponsors, and you want sponsors with a different set of skills, and you want to know who else is out there besides your group of 5 sponsors. In our case, we had we had 3 or 4 married people, and all of their spouses were invited to get involved with the sponsorship too, because we knew it takes a lot of people to sponsor a family for a year. So that turned out to be very helpful, because people brought different skills, whether it was somebody was really good at putting together IKEA furniture, and somebody else was good at driving around because he had time, because he was retired. And it was important to have that personal contact that, as Arius referred to, when we were looking for places. So with respect to planning ahead, I think getting a good team ready to go, having a plan and a person responsible that's actually written down, and the training the sponsors on different issues. So we had a settlement worker come in who spent an hour or 2 hours just with the sponsors, talking about the different issues that arise in housing issues. And housing is a concern. We had a lot of people who could afford to raise money or spend money on expensive housing. And the settlement worker walked us through, you should not over-sponsor your family, because you're undermining their independence, number 1. Number 2, you're creating a headache for yourself if you get to the end of 12 months. Where is that family going to go if they can't afford the rent that you've put them in an expensive apartment? They are going to be on welfare because they haven't had the good fortune to pick up within a year, which is not an unusual thing to have had happen. So we talked through issues like that at the front end. And then we wanted a place that was close to where the majority of the sponsors lived, because we all expected to be involved with this family for the first 12 months. And that turned out to be really an important aspect of housing. So with family number 1, we had a relatively easy experience. We knew they were coming. We identified Thorncliffe Park as the place that was convenient for the sponsors and was full of other newcomers to Canada, so it would be a welcoming place for them. And then several of us got involved in literally scouring the streets, looking for signs, going on the net, following up on all the usual net services to make appointments. We usually had somebody manning the phones, making the phone calls, and somebody in their car driving around who would get a phone call saying, quick, run over to such and such an address and meet the landlord or the superintendent, something like that. And we ended up in a low-rise building, not particularly flashy, with family number one. We needed a 3-bedroom apartment, so we snapped it up quickly. And it was because of the personal contact with the superintendent that we got that building. We made a point of following up with him, being reassuring to him about the sponsorship. You have to have a sponsor willing to put a letter together saying that they're guaranteeing the rent for the first year. We had worked all that out in advance. So we were lucky with family number one to get them a tiny but 3-bedroom apartment that they are still in, and they came in 2016. The father ended up going back to school. The mom also went back to school and just finished her high school diploma. So it's taken them quite a while to get off the ground economically, but they're in an apartment that they can afford, even though they haven't been able to earn any income of any size. And they've had a 5th child, so that tiny apartment is getting tinier every day. Family number two, we had the same thing, a housing committee, and between 2016 and 2019, when the second family came, house prices in Toronto went up a lot. So we had a $1,500 budget in 2016 for the family of 6 people, and we were able to put them in an apartment that was $1,500 in Thorncliffe Park. But by the time the second family came, that identical apartment down the hall for them, number one, wasn't available, but number two, it was $2,200. So you can imagine the welfare rates did not keep up with that kind of jump in rents. So we had set a budget of $2,100, I think, initially. And we spent a lot of time looking for places near family number one. That was our first hope. And we were having a terrible time. One of the things you have to, when it comes to planning ahead, you have to worry about temporary housing. And family number one, when they came, we already knew where we wanted them to go. We already had the hookup with the superintendent, and we had talked to the family online about what the apartment was like. So we had already committed to an apartment for them before they even got here. So they just had to view it, and then we had to wait for it to be repainted and ready. So they moved into temporary housing with one of the sponsors for about a month. And that was not terribly successful because that sponsor had a dog, and the mother was terrified of dogs, and the family were terrified to tell us because they're so dependent on us. So we didn't know. And she spent a lot of time crying that first month, and the woman in the household where she was staying was very concerned about her and her mental health. But once she got away from the dog, everything was fine. And the housing has worked out fine. With respect to family number two, we didn't have a place for them, and they needed we had arranged temporary housing that I was in the fortunate position that I could move out of my house, my husband and I, because we had a friend with a vacant apartment. So we moved into the vacant apartment, and the family moved into this house, which is not that far from Thorncliffe Park. So when the family number two arrived, we had we just told the local school where the other kids went, the cousins went, that their address was with the cousins in this tiny apartment, and started them in school there. And they had to take the bus from my house up to that school, and it all worked out fine. But they were here for about, in total, 2 months or a bit more, while we worked really hard throughout that time to try and find something they could afford. We finally identified a place in Flemington Park, and because we were doing exactly this personal thing that Azarias referred to, we were not only making phone calls, we were going around meeting superintendents, talking to landlords, doing what we could whenever we could get an appointment. And that particular day, one of our sponsors was up in Flemington Park, found a 3-bedroom apartment that was going to be perfect. And he was told by the superintendents, sorry, or the property managers actually, sorry, that one's gone. He was in the room when a second phone call came in and somebody with a 3-bedroom gave the notice that they were leaving. So he immediately snapped it up right on the spot and said we would want to apply for that, that particular apartment. So then began a rather long process where we got our application and our guarantees and deposits in, no problem. And we knew that we were first in line for that apartment. But the property managers have a meeting, and the property managers came back and said, after about 4 days, came back and said we weren't going to get we were not getting the apartment. So when John found this out, John had gone up to follow up with them. He phoned me to say that they weren't going to give us the apartment. And I called this is where you have to be careful about your sponsors. You have to have people who are prepared to be advocates and fight. So I called the superintendent to say, why didn't we get the apartment? And they told us that they're within their legal rights to not give us any reason. We just didn't get it. And in fact, they're right. They don't have a legal right to explain to every applicant why you didn't get the apartment. But nonetheless, I asked the superintendent who her boss was and called the boss. And that turned out to be the key, because the boss was the head of a development company with several buildings. And we had a long discussion. I was so grateful he took my call. We had a long discussion about refugees and sponsorships and how we could help and how Canada had to help and all that kind of stuff. And in the end, this guy said he was not going to undermine his staff's decision, but would I like a 4-bedroom apartment in the same building that hadn't even been advertised as available? To which I said, yes, of course. And then he said, it's going to be an extra $50. Well, by that time, we were up to $24.50 in rent with our $2,100 budget. So all through this, because the housing was so difficult, we were having meetings with our sponsor group by Zoom or conference call to make sure everybody was on side. And we decided to take the apartment because by then the family didn't have an apartment for over 2.5 months. And the apartment was perfect. But, and they are also still in that nice big 4-bedroom apartment, which is perfect for them with these 2 adult kids. It really was lucky. But we knew we were over our budget in our housing allowance. So it was a problem for us. What would happen at month 13? So we had a very serious meeting with the family to say, look, if you have to go on welfare at the end of all this, you are not going to be able to afford this apartment. So for the balance of the sponsorship year, we're either going to have to find you're going to have to satisfy yourself. Can you pay this rent, $24.50 a month, without us or not? And we took them to the welfare office. We took them to find out if there were housing subsidies. They talked to their settlement. They had a settlement worker in Thorncliffe Park as well. They talked to their settlement worker, and most importantly for them, they talked to their family because they have a couple of successful brothers. So they knew that they could, and also they had 2 adult children who intended to work. So we were able to commit for them, but we put it all in writing to them because if they hadn't had a way of paying this rent at month 13, we were going to have to, as sponsors, spend all the rest of the time looking for an apartment for them and helping them move into less expensive accommodation. So once they said, yes, you don't have to worry about that, we can pay it, we could go on with all the other business of being sponsors. But it was just fortunate that that personal connection with the big cheese at the development company led to such a happy result. And the family, the elder daughter had a job in a bakery by that time, and she brought the superintendent a giant box of sweets, and we wrote the landlord there a thank you note telling him how wonderful this rather bad situation had turned out. And the family are very happily there even now, and will probably stay there for quite a long time because it's so big and spacious, and suddenly the rent doesn't seem too exorbitant compared to other rents in Toronto. And the only other thing about Toronto, the only other strategy is Toronto is very expensive. not just for sponsors, but for your families when they get here. And you have to consider, is this where you want them to be, and can you set them up in a much cheaper location somehow? Because it's getting very difficult for people who are low-income people to live in downtown Toronto, I think.
Awesome. Thank you, Liz. Lots of really rich kind of strategies there, I think. I'm hearing about, relationship building, about planning, and I want to direct people. I shared a little resource in the chat earlier that Liz had shared with me in advance. If you want an inside look into Liz's brain, I think, in organizing themselves as a, as a housing kind of group, that might be helpful to you. So you're welcome to download it and adapt it yourself. So thank you, Liz, for sharing that. And we'll have a chance to come back to you with some more questions.
Okay.
I also see some other things coming in the chat. We have a settlement worker in Durham talking about the lack of affordable housing as well. So it sounds like it's not just in downtown Toronto, but also in Durham and other parts of the GTA and beyond that are experiencing these challenging rents. And I also see some questions about subsidized housing, which we're very lucky to have Maria as our last resource person who is going to be able to address some of those questions in the context of Ontario specifically. Beyond Ontario, we'll see what we can do maybe with the knowledge on this call, because this project is Ontario focused. So yeah, thank you. Our third panelist is Usama. And so Usama is going to share a little bit about his perspective with Habitat and all of that and arriving to Kingston. So go ahead, Usama.
Hi everyone, how are you? My name is Usama Al-Sarkadi. A refugee came from Syria by private sponsorship in 2016 with a wife and 2 kids, and my wife was pregnant. The sponsorship took place of 2 bedroom apartment in 2016. Also, now after 2016, we are 5 people in 2 bedroom. So in the first year, I'll start looking an option to find a bigger place or even to buy a house. I'm thinking about that in the first year or the second year. The good thing that I start working from the first 2 months reaching Canada. So I have the history from work. Buying a house through the bank is hard to me for the down payment, credit check, and these things. In 2018, my sponsorship mentioned in front of me about an organization called Habitat for Humanity and Habitat for Humanity. I will explain a little bit about this organization. It is a non-profit organization helping build safe, decent, and affordable housing for local families. Anyone can apply to become a Habitat homeowner, but must be in need for housing, able to mask affordable mortgage payment, and be willing to actively partner with their local Habitat, including a comment to completing 5 volunteer hours if you selected to be a Habitat homeowner. So I start with Habitat and start my application in 2018. At that time, I was looking for a job because I quit my first job. So my application come with refuse. So after a few months, I find a new job and apply again. So I got approved. It is good change because you know that the housing now in general is very high prices and hard to find affordable house for 6 people. Now I'm 7 people to 7 people. After applying, they asked me to do the 500 volunteer hours. Of course, you can do it by yourself, by yourself and your wife. If you have adult children, your friends can help with that. The mortgage is very decent, and there's no down payment, no interest. Just you have to do is the volunteer sweet equity hours. After, of course, after they start building the house in 2019, but after the lockdown due to COVID, they stopped the project for 5 months, 6 months. After that, they continue, and I received the keys for my house in 2021. I'm now sitting in my house. That's a good way for saving money and a better place than where I was living. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Osama. I think that's really interesting to hear, especially at the beginning as you're weighing your options,
Yeah,
trying to decide what is best for your family. And that's amazing that your sponsors connected you to that opportunity.
yeah. Thank you.
Wonderful.
I'm not good speaker, so I
No, you did great. Thank you. And I don't know if you can see in the chat, everyone is congratulating you on your house. It sounds like you put a lot of yourself into that with the volunteer hours and
Of course,
everything.
work with the volunteer hours. You don't have time. You have to do volunteer hours in the morning because they open from 9 to 5, and you have
Wow.
to. So I have to change my shift to the evening shift.
Wow. Wow. It sounds like you did a lot for your family and for your future. So
Yeah.
congratulations.
Thank you.
And thank you for sharing. I think that it's really inspiring to hear a good news story when so much of, of what we think about are the barriers and the challenges.
Thank you.
And maybe, I don't know, maybe if there's a link I can put to Habitat for Humanity for people who want to check it out. I'm not sure. I think people would be familiar with Habitat. So, and this again was in the Kingston area. So, yeah, awesome. Thanks, Usama. Maybe we'll keep an eye out for if there's any specific questions for you, and then we can come back to you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. So our final resource person before we go to questions is going to be Maria Ashman, who is the manager at Central Housing in Windsor. I'm thinking Winnipeg, Windsor. So Maria, on to you to say a few words from your perspective.
Hi, Michelle, and hello, everyone. Thanks for having me, and it's really a pleasure of mine. I appreciate the fact that you've invited me to be here to share the little knowledge that I have. And for us here at the Central Housing Registry, it's pretty straightforward. What is it that we do and how we help newcomers, specifically privately sponsored refugees. What we do here, we manage the centralized waiting list for social housing in the Windsor, Essex community area, right? So anyone who is in need of social housing, rent-to-geared income housing, you first have to have an application with us, right? Our service manager is the City of Windsor. They are responsible for what we do here, and we report to them. So whatever, whether it's a rent subsidy, whether it is exclusively social housing, whatever it is, once it's social housing, you have to have an application in with us, and we will assess that application for eligibility. Once you are eligible, you're placed on a waiting list for whatever your needs are. So when you do make your application, depends on the needs of your family. It may be, you may be in need of a bachelor apartment right up to a 5-bedroom. And as you can imagine, as the size of the home increases, the house increases, it is more difficult to secure because they're in high demand, right? Right now, when we look at the waiting list for a 2-bedroom, a 3-bedroom, we're looking at sometimes 15 to 20 years. It's not great news, but it is what it is right now because the needs are so much greater than the resources that we have. So that is what is happening now. How do we get around that? How do we help newcomers, right? The best thing for newcomers to do is to link with your settlement agencies or your social agencies because they work with us a lot. They can guide you in terms of, sometimes there are language barriers, sometimes there are barriers of interpretation, right? So these social agencies are in place to help you to negotiate the system, to explain to you what you need to have, what documents you need to have to show that you're eligible. So if you need, well, when you're applying, you need to show status in Canada. What documents do you need? A passport, your PR card. If you are refugee claimant, whatever refugee claimant documents that you need, they will assist you in that process, right? So that is in a nutshell for what we do here. But in addition to that, from my personal experience, because what we do is it's clear cut, it's specific. There's so much that we can do at the Central Housing Registry. But from a personal perspective, I would say to persons who are seeking housing, as Elizabeth spoke earlier, and she spoke about affordability, living in big cities and all of that. It is important to make sure you, as best as you can, to create strong networks. If it's a situation where you can volunteer, so you can create networks with persons who can help you with a guarantor letter or some sort of letter to say that I know this person, I can vouch for this person is a person of good character, right? When you're seeking, because the social housing market is so tight, sometimes persons will have to go into the private market because you're on the waiting list so long. So what can you do to help yourself in the meantime? So networking is very important, right? So volunteering, things like that. If it's a situation where you can search the housing market and move to places that are not so much saturated, where the rent may be cheaper, that may be an avenue that you want to take into consideration, that may be suitable. Not too remote that you don't have good support system in place, or transportation is not readily available, but you can do your own assessment, and see what best suits your family, right? That's one strategy that is important. Another thing that is important too, as an immigrant myself, one of the important things to do is try to establish credit, right? So you can start getting as independent as quickly as possible. And one simple way to do that, everyone knows that we're living in the age of technology. You're away from your family, you moved thousands of miles away. If you can get, even if it's a small postpaid phone plan, that is one way you can establish credit. So when it comes time for you to secure housing, you may have a credit, you can start building your credit score from there. So that's one strategy that has helped me in the past. And that is one strategy that I would pass on to persons who are seeking to secure housing and don't have, a credit score. So those are simple things that anybody can use. So the important thing, as I said earlier, is to establish your networks, get in touch with settlement workers, social agencies that can help you. They will guide you in the right direction. That's why they are there. They can, whatever the need is, I know we're speaking specifically about housing, but whatever the needs are with settlement, they can help you, they can point you in the right direction. And if it's for housing, they'll send you straight to the Central Housing Registry. And I'm sure there are other agencies that are structured in the same way throughout the province. Different cities, municipalities, they have their own central housing offices that if you're seeking rent-to-geared income, that is where it all starts. So this is just one of many across the entire province. So that are the strategies that I would suggest to help privately sponsored refugees who are seeking to make Canada their home, and their sponsors as well, just to do their research as much as possible Again, as Elizabeth said earlier, plan as much as you can, research as much as you can. Those are important strategies to put in place to help you to secure housing and get these persons independent as quickly as possible and help them to assimilate into the Canadian culture.
Thank you so much, Maria, and thank you to all of our resource people for sharing. And thank you to you all for engaging in the chat. I really hope we can address all of your many excellent questions. We have probably about 15 minutes to address some of the questions in the chat. Then I'm going to go on to the questions that were sent in advance. There's a little bit of crossover, but I think there's some unique ones here. So first, I want to draw people's attention to some links being shared about Habitat for Humanity in the Toronto context. For those who are interested, thank you to Shakira for sharing those. And it sounds like in every community, it might be a little bit different. So it might be worthwhile taking a look at that. And again, this is probably a long-term strategy. Also, I would like to, I think I'm going to ask the first question to Maria, since you were just talking a bit. For those people who are maybe new to the idea of subsidized housing, can you maybe just like give a little bit more definition of what you mean by rent geared to income and eligibility? So, you know, like, could any sponsor group, you know, approach you? Like, probably not. So who would be eligible for something like subsidized housing lists?
Everybody can be, anybody can be eligible. Eligibility depends on how much you earn, and you have to establish that you have status in Canada. So those are the determinant factors. So whoever it is, as long as you have status in Canada and your income is at a particular level, as long as you apply, you may go on the waiting list. However, I will admit for privately sponsored refugees, we have to look at the specifics of the, I'm not sure if it's a contract or the specific program that they came under. They may have different details to them. So we have to deal with it on a case-to-case basis, because some persons may be eligible for housing within that year. If it is that the sponsor is not responsible for housing for them, that is not specifically stated in the contract per se. Some, they may become eligible after a year. So it depends on the contract that the sponsor entered into. So it's on a case-by-case basis. So we'll have to review the terms, and then we can make a decision from there.
Yeah, thanks, Maria. I know that's something that like probably the number one question that does come up, because and I did do some research with different folks before this webinar, asking people from settlement and from sponsorship what their experience has been, because it does seem to be slightly case by case, as you say, and that's not a great answer when people want the answer.
Yes, but there's no one answer.
Yeah, exactly. And what I found is that 95% of the time, folks said sponsored refugees are eligible to go on these wait lists, because in the they're not going to get this house in a year, in 2 years, in 3 years. This is a long-term strategy.
Right.
It would have to do, though, with proving, you know, income during that first year, which is a bit tricky. But to clarify, sponsors are always responsible for finding housing. And so that's why there's some confusion around eligibility sometimes. So this is what folks are telling me, that, you know, many settlement agencies will put in applications even during the first year, and they've told me they've not been refused those applications. So I would say it depends on, like you said, Maria, work with the settlement worker, work with central housing to learn if you think this is something the sponsored refugee will need in the long term.
Right. Put that application in. And at the time, should something come up, at the time an offer is being made, most times you have to update your documents. So you have to prove eligibility at that point as well.
Yeah, exactly. So there would be multiple points to prove eligibility.
And I should also point out, there are times person's situation may change. Say you are a privately sponsored refugee, and for what, unfortunately, you may find yourself in a situation where you're a victim of domestic violence. You can apply. You can apply because you will be considered a special priority there, right? Your life is in danger. So those are little gray areas where persons may become eligible, even though they may have come here as sponsored refugees and their sponsor is responsible for them. But sometimes things happen. Yeah. So, as I said, case by case basis.
And forgive me, I'll ask one more question of you, Maria, then I'll go to our other resource people. We have questions about wait times. I know you said in Windsor, Essex, it's quite long. So is it advised that clients go on as early as possible? What are wait times like across like the province? Do you have any
I don't
have
have statistics for the province, but I think I jotted down wait times here. So for a 2 or 3 bedroom, the wait time is in general 5 to 10 years. For a one bedroom, 15 to 20. Same applies for a 4 bedroom and a 5 bedroom. Yes.
Wow.
So the chronological list, which is the larger list that most persons are on, that's the general wait time. But for persons who fall on our priority list, like special priority or what we call P2 persons who find themselves homeless or couch surfing, that kind of thing, it can be 6 months, 1 year. Those are the priorities. So it is a shorter wait time if the person is considered priority applicant.
Yeah. Wow, that is a really sobering statistic. I think I'd like to ask a question about that in a minute about bigger picture advocacy, but I'm going to maybe have a chance for some of our other panelists to talk. I wanted to ask Azarias, actually, if you have any advice or thoughts around some of the tricky things that you maybe deal with on a day-to-day. For example, having sponsors or others acting as guarantors for sponsored refugees, or getting around issues of credit checks and things like that. What would you say to people who are trying to figure out those issues?
So I want to talk about guarantor and credit history. It depends on landlords if they require a guarantor or not. Some landlord, this is their policy. You have to bring a guarantor. If you don't have a guarantor, you cannot get an apartment. But there are others, they don't mind. They say, just come in, we have no problem. And to find a guarantor is really very, very difficult, especially when you are new to Canada. You don't have connections, and to find a guarantor is difficult. So here in Winnipeg, what we have done, our organization cannot be a guarantor. But as I said, we have a rental workshop. In our rental workshop, we teach newcomers to Canada about their rights and responsibilities of tenant and landlords, how to take care of an apartment, everything. So at the end, we give a rental training certificate. Now this certificate, we have connections with so many landlords. Now this certificate is recognized by the landlords. They look at when you apply. We advise them to attach photocopy of this certificate to the application. Now the landlords will look at this certificate and will feel comfortable to rent to this person because he or she has done the rental training. So the landlord feel really happy that my apartment or my house will be kept in proper way. The tenant knows if he or she will do this, they have to pay. So they really recognize our certificate. So this certificate is not doesn't play a role of guarantor, but it will play a role to convince the landlord so that they can rent to this tenant, and the landlord, they know that when a client finds an apartment, we don't leave it there. We organize home visit. We talk to them, and we advise them how to take care of an apartment or what is needed. We go through the house, everything. So landlords now, they are really convinced and they're happy with our services, and it works. It's really working. Yeah. So
Awesome.
this is what we are doing, and we have our connections, as I said, with so many landlords in Winnipeg. Yeah. So
that's awesome, Azarias. I've never heard of that strategy. Actually, that's new to me. So I think that is really interesting as a kind of other possibility. I wonder too, Liz, if you have any thoughts like from that kind of on the ground experience. You talked about developing, kind of, those networking and also acting as a guarantor. It seems like for sponsors, that's pretty much a best practice, or at least like a common kind of thing to do in terms of signing up to be a guarantor. And I guess you had no trouble with that at the time?
Well, with both families, we had to have a letter of guarantor to apply for the apartments. And the guarantor's letter had to be from the guarantor's employer, saying that they earned X or Y for income, and that and so that, along with our check, went in for the application. It's one of those things you have to head off at the pass, because we were going to meet with the superintendents and people like that, and you really had to be prepared to act very quickly. So we had worked all this out, and who was going to be the guarantor and what kind of letter would she have and that kind of stuff. We had worked all that stuff out in advance, and which turned out to be very handy, because when the family number 2 had this opportunity, she was at work, and we had somebody had to go down to her office and pick up the letter and began to check and get everything all organized right then and there. So it's the kind of thing you can prepare for in advance, but you are a bit based. I did also on one of the times I was out driving around, I had actually asked another sponsor group, their project lead, to help. And we went out driving together to go look at places, and he took me to a place that had been very helpful for the refugee in his sponsor group. And we already knew the cost of the rent. And so we met with the owner of that building, who was happy to let me jump to the top of the list with my family, but he was going to charge $200 more a month for us for that privilege, which was, we left in a terrible huff, but for all the good that would do us if we hadn't been lucky enough to find something else shortly thereafter. So there are landlords who are not as, he was coming across very nicely, and if we hadn't had the piece of information about how much apartments actually cost in the building, we would not even have known that we were being ripped off for $200 a month.
Wow.
So,
Thanks, Liz.
yeah,
And
knowledge is important.
yeah, I see that some folks have been sharing in the chat that like for some groups, yeah, it's very common for sponsorship groups to use individual or family guarantors. And I also want to, if anyone in the audience or the participants know about rent training programs in Ontario, or maybe Azarias, I don't know if you're familiar as well, since a lot of our audience will be from Ontario. I did share one resource I'm familiar with called Rent Smart. They do trainings, especially in the context of settlement agencies, and it's a train the trainer model. But if you go there, there's lots of amazing resources, and I think you could probably find some more information on rent training there. So I don't know if anyone else has anything to add on that. Okay. I have Usama, I have a question for you. One of the questions in the chat was about the importance of finding a home in a community where there are other newcomers. The question was, how important is it to you to find housing where there are others who maybe like speak your same language or share a similar culture? Was this something that was important to you? I know in Kingston, maybe it's challenging. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yes, it's very important to find affordable house, and with affordable renting also,
Mm-hmm.
because we are, as you know, we are came newcomer to Canada, and we start a new life here. So we start to totally start a new life in Canada, and we want to build a future for our kids.
Mm-hmm.
So if we work and pay most of our work salary to the rent of the house, that doesn't make anything for us.
Mm-hmm.
So when I start looking to buy a house, not to rent a bigger house. So
Mm-hmm.
that make saving more money for me, for my family, for my kids, for their education.
Mm-hmm.
It's very hard to find that, and when I find the habitat program, I found it is very suitable for me. You don't have to pay down payment. You don't have to pay interest. Uh, in our culture, interest is not common. We don't pay interest in anything we buy. So this also some families they find that a problem for them to borrow. They have the down payment, but they find that it is a problem for them to borrow money from the bank with interest.
Mm-hmm.
So they prefer to rent than to purchase a houses with interest.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. Thank you, Osama.
Thank you.
The last question I'm going to take from the chat before we go on to the prepared questions is around advocacy and the bigger picture. So, I mean, we're hearing about the long wait times. We know how challenging it is to find affordable housing in Toronto and other places. Someone talked about, how can we push the government to build more low income housing? It's a big question, and I think we really need to address that. We're not just trying to survive as we find one house, but how can we advocate for an improved system? And Azarias, I know that you are part of the Canadian Council for Refugees Housing Network. This is a really great space to get together, advocate, and really push for better policies. Does any of our panelists have anything they want to share around that bigger picture, what we can do, so all newcomers and refugees and immigrants are able to have a better environment to land?
Well, for me, I think what the sponsoring refugee families has done is made me aware of the big gap. And so I'm on the mailing list for Toronto's Right to Housing group, but I don't see much progress. I'm pessimistic about there being many changes for affordability in Toronto.
Yeah. Anyone else?
We can also push through these organizations nationwide, or we can talk to our MPs. Our MPs, we can talk to them and we can give them statistics even to show them that this is a need. This is what is happening on the ground. Yeah, there are so many ways we can talk to our MPs, and the MPs can convey the message. And we can talk to the government, Canadian government, also through these organizations. So there are many ways we can always push, showing the statistics and showing that this is a need.
Absolutely. I'm sharing a link to the Canadian Council for Refugees. If anyone is unfamiliar with them, there's power in numbers, and a reminder that, there is a provincial election coming up. I think there are opportunities to have our voices heard. we have a few comments here. The government, if the government cannot build new affordable buildings, they should push private landlords to, to at least have some affordable housing. A major philanthropists to fund large affordable housing projects. Yeah, so when we decided on the topic of this webinar, it was based on the survey we did with all of our stakeholders on their top issues, and housing was number one. And I think it goes to show, there's been more than 120 of us on this call, and it's clearly something we need to put all of our heads together to solve, because it's really damaging, when folks are not able to find that safe place to land.
We are facing challenges in finding accessible apartment or houses.
Mm-hmm.
So accessibility for maybe wheelchair people, to find an apartment for them, it's really challenging also.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, everyone. And I see there was a hand up, but I'm sorry, we're not going to have questions from the floor at this time, but feel free to add any comments or questions in the chat and we will get to them. We have about 10-15 minutes left in the webinar, and I want to make sure we've addressed all the questions sent in advance. Thank you to everyone who filled out the pre-survey for this webinar to help us know what your learning goals were. So I think some of these questions have been answered, but I divided all of the questions into like 3 main topics. The first is where to find housing help and resources for refugees and sponsors. So there were a lot of questions, and I think this might be interesting to people on the call who are settlement agency staff. A lot of sponsors and sponsored refugees don't know where to go to access this support. So I think clearly there's a need to maybe be a little bit more clear on how to access these services, who is eligible and when and why. So we got a lot of questions. What kinds of clients do housing workers support? Can sponsors get this housing information before the sponsored refugees arrive? Because that's one of the keys, is getting that information in a timely way. So maybe Azarias, do you have anything you haven't shared about what the role is of these organizations like yours? Like, what exactly do you provide that a sponsor does not, is not able to do as much?
As I said, what we do is we help newcomers to find apartment for rent. But before that, we give them orientation, we give them training, we give them rental workshop. As I said, we give them rental workshop, and we help them how to search for an apartment or house for rent. And we teach them how to find an apartment or houses for rent. We don't want to search for them, but we help them, we teach them how to search. So those who can search for themselves, that's well and good. And those who need extra help, we give them extra help.
Yeah.
And the other service we give, once they find an apartment, I told you, we don't leave it there. We organize home visit. Then the home visit, we go, we talk to them. We make sure they have no problem in the apartment or the house that they are renting. And if there is a problem between the tenant and landlord, sometimes it can be misunderstanding. Simply maybe language barriers or culture or human rights. So we come in between the tenant and the landlord. So we become like mediators. We solve the problem. Also, the sponsors, those who sponsor refugees, so we also organize a workshop for them, and we also have a pre-arrival workshop. pre-arrival workshop so that refugees or people who are preparing to come to Canada, they have an idea how to rent, how much is the rent, what they are expecting, and they have a lot of information before they come. It's a pre-arrival workshop. We have it also, we do it on Zoom. And when people are coming, they know they have a little bit of an idea how to rent.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we help the sponsors also to find apartment for rent, but finding an apartment before the clients come, it becomes a little bit challenging. And we sometimes advise them to take a temporary accommodation. And once the sponsor refugees is here, then we help them to find apartment for rent.
Thank you, Azaria. So it sounds like, as a housing advisor, when it comes to sponsorship, yes, the sponsor is responsible for a lot of this, but you are an extra resource for them if things go wrong, if you're wanting to develop certain relationships or have access to certain information. That's very interesting. And I see some commentary in the chat around, sponsored refugees as opposed to other refugees. And so, yeah, I mean, this what workshop is just about sponsored refugees, since that's what we focus on, but there's a huge bigger picture of many different kinds of refugees and newcomers, or that are coming through different parts of the immigration system that are also in need. Yeah.
For our organization, we help everybody, all newcomers to Canada. We don't say these are maybe refugee claimant or temporary foreign workers or refugee sponsors. We help everybody, and all our services are free of charge.
Thank you,
We are
Zarius.
private funded. We are private funded, and we have the flexibility of helping everybody.
Thank you. And I would encourage folks, we can't cover every agency, every province, I'm sorry, and we are kind of concentrated in Ontario, but I'm just putting here, if you're unfamiliar with settlement.org, 211, this is how you find your local settlement agency in Ontario. They're going to help you navigate this, because the housing sector can be very confusing. It can be separate, and so some help in navigating that might be useful. And I'd encourage you to consider, you could take a look there and find an agency that provides that support. Liz, I think I saw your hand up. Did you want to add anything?
Pardon me, not a lot, but I did, there was a lot, back when we got involved, there was a lot of training being offered by the settlement, the SAWs, settlement agreement holders, and you have to kind of exploit what you've got. And then there are like Wood Green Wood Green has a housing office. There were Scarborough had one, East York had a housing help center. So we did all that kind of calling in advance. I didn't find any of them particularly helpful. I found the going around knocking on doors more useful.
And that goes to show that there, part of the reason we wanted to talk about strategies is that, sponsors have some unique strategies as well. Settlement agencies have their strategies. And it seems like, there's different pathways to trying to find affordable housing, and we need all of them perhaps going at once. Yeah, including the more grassroots knocking on doors way. Yeah.
Well, the settlement workers were very helpful in giving us resources of where to go to.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, there were places to go to tell you to go places, which was very helpful.
Yeah,
you don't
exactly.
know
Yeah, it's telling you where to go, and that can be helpful, but it doesn't necessarily find you a house, in that moment for sure, and it can be quite challenging still. Thank you. I'm going to, thank you. There's some good chats going on about studies on housing in Ontario, and chats about destining perhaps more folks to rural areas. So I think that's something that I've been hearing a lot of talk about recently, about can we encourage folks to go to smaller centers where maybe housing is more affordable. yeah, one piece in the puzzle. I'm going to go to the second topic of questions because we're a little running out of time. To be honest, I think we've addressed most of these questions around credit history, guarantors, and landlords. So actually, I think I'm going to skip this one and go to the last slide, which is on subsidized housing. So Maria, we already talked about who is eligible, I think, and proving income. Is there anything else you want to add around how people can understand the subsidized housing options available to them that we haven't covered? And maybe folks, if you have any specific subsidized housing questions, put it in the chat. This is the last chance to talk about this. Oh, you're muted, Maria.
Okay, so you wanted to know the different programs that we have available, or?
Yeah, could you maybe just explain what you mean by rent geared to income, and like that there's different programs available in Ontario?
Okay, so rent geared to income, in a nutshell, is based on how much you earn and how much the rental, the market value is for the rental property, right? We see where there's a shortfall, and based on some calculations, then we decide how much your rent should be. So that's rent geared to income in a nutshell.
Mm-hmm. And you were saying there's different eligibility, like if, for example, someone is experiencing domestic abuse and homelessness, are there other programs like that people should be aware of, like in the local area as opposed to provincially, or other things like that?
Okay, so for the SPP, that is for the priority listing, the wait list, right? But for the different programs, yes, we have local programs as well as provincial-wide program. For one provincial-wide program is what we call the COB. It's the, so it's an Ontario housing benefit that you can access anywhere in Ontario. Again, it's based on your income. You make an application. We look at the eligibility criteria, and if you are eligible, then a set amount is given to you, paid to you every month, and it's paid to a household. So you can use that anywhere you live. That benefit goes with you anywhere you live in Ontario. Specifically to our locality, we have one that mirrors the provincial-wide benefit, which is called the Windsor Essex Housing Benefit, which is similar, but it's only accessible to persons who live in the Windsor Essex community.
And where, I mean, not everyone's in Windsor, of course, so where could people go, even outside of Ontario? How could they go and find a bit more information? Should they go to a settlement agency? Should they go to a website?
Okay, the important thing is to find your service provider for your area. And it's usually the city website. So for us, the City of Windsor, it may be City of Toronto, City of Oshawa, wherever you are, the service provider is usually your starting point. When you log onto your city website, it normally points you to the housing department, and you can call. They usually have a contact number, or sometimes they have an online. There's a site you can visit to get your contacts. You can send an email, you can do a phone call. There are persons there to help you. So the important thing is to get in touch with your service provider, which most times is your local city. Whatever your city is, you contact that website and it will give you full information.
Awesome.
Yes.
Thank you, Maria.
You're welcome.
I think that addresses most of the questions sent in advance. Any final comments from any of our resource people that you would like to share before we wrap up? Put you on the spot there, eh? Yeah, go ahead, Liz.
Well, I think it really is heartwarming to hear Osama's case of getting into Habitat for Humanity, because if you can tackle the housing issue, being a sponsor is such a rewarding experience. And I'm sure a lot of the sponsors on this call are dreading the thought of going through the fight to get proper housing, but it's certainly worth it if you can help a family get settled and then move forward. And Osama's story was heartwarming, wonderful.
Yes, thank you, Sama, for sharing.
Thank you very much. I have suggestion that we do it back home. The government build the houses for the people, for the families, and families start the payments before they get in the house.
Mhm.
So while the processing time of building, uh, if the government can do here, build houses and take money from the families, that's considered too kind that the house after 2 or 3 years, let's say, they have good money or saving money in the house they will move or they purchase.
Mhm.
And the government also help take some help from the families to start building.
Mhm. Interesting. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I think we need to think of better systems, don't we?
Yeah.
And learn. Mhm. Thank you.
People
I
learn
see.
from others' experience. That
Exactly. Exactly. Thank you so much. Maria, I don't know if you feel comfortable to share your email, but there is a request in the chat. Maybe if afterwards, I don't know, if people maybe have questions who are in the Windsor area, is it all right to contact you?
I'm gonna post the email address that I can be contacted, or any member of staff in the Central Housing
Perfect.
Registry. All
Thank
right.
you. If you want to pop that in the chat, so especially I
Mhm.
guess if you're in the Windsor Essex area, that email will be shared. And also I see if anyone needs support with LGBTQ plus newcomers in the GTA, you can contact Sarah at CCS. That's very helpful. Thank you. I know we haven't been able to talk today about the specific needs of LGBTQ2S newcomers when it comes to housing. There's too much to talk about, but there is a lot to consider there as well in terms of safety, especially in comfort. I think we'll wrap up there then, unless Azarias or Maria, you want to add anything.
So mine is to thank you and thank the participants for their time and their questions. And I wanted to add at New Journey Housing here in Winnipeg, we also teach about buying houses. We have a home purchasing workshop whereby we talk about mortgages. And we have another workshop, investment, money management. We talk about budgeting, credit, taxes, and investment. Yeah. So
That
thank you
sounds
very much.
super interesting and super needed. Thank you. You know, maybe afterwards, if it's okay, I'll share a link to that with folks too. I'm going to be sharing some resources, so that's great.
Yes, yes.
Yes, awesome. Well, thank you all again, like you said, Azarias, for attending, spending an hour and a half with us to tackle this really big challenge, and also to get some positive stories and strategies on how we can try to respond. I'll thank our panelists again for their time and their thoughts. If you are able, please complete the post survey. There's a link here and also a link to join our newsletter list. If you liked this webinar, we, Allies for Refugee Integration, are going to be doing 3 of these a year. The next one will probably be on positive stories of sponsorship and the benefits of sponsorship. So sign up to our newsletter. That's how you'll hear about future webinars. And you'll also get an email after this with a post survey. I know it takes time to fill out, but because it's our first webinar, we want to hear from you. How can we improve and what did you like the most? So that'll be really helpful to us. Great, wishing you all a very good rest of your day. Thank you, Floren, for your support today with the webinar as well. Bye, everyone.
All
Bye
right.
bye.